Good afternoon, Taja Hao. My Chinese is very bad, otherwise I would try and speak more. I'm fake news here because I'm not part of the industry. But I have been going to China for 1 week each month for the last 15 years. I am really only 35 years old, but air travel is not good for the body. What I want to try and do is I think Westerners, Europeans, need to understand what is going on inside China in order to understand what Chinese outbound tourists need. So I'm interested in the way in China that contemporary culture is becoming an enormous leisure pursuit for the Chinese. I'm also interested in the way Chinese young people, what Gordon called millennials, are much more interested in knowledge and experience than in possessions. I also have the best slides. This is a slide of Art Basel's art fair in Basel, and as you can see, the very large number of Chinese people. I want to start with 4 or 5 very quick examples of things we've been involved in. This is Shikoh in southern China, which used to be known as the manufacturing center of the world. This will be finished in December of this year and will include the V&A Museum, which will move there and open along with an enormous design museum, F&B, hotels, and other leisure facilities. This is an image of the Long Museum in Shanghai. Wang Wei, the woman there who's a very good friend, just spent $170 million on the Modigliani painting. When Prince William went to Shanghai, where was the reception held? But in her museum. It's also only one of 4 museums she's building. She's just built a museum in Chongqing. She's building another one in Wuhan. I've lost a slide. When one travels as much as I do, one's losing things all the time. This is another project I was involved in, which was the British Pavilion at the Shanghai Expo in 2010, a pavilion built by the architect Thomas Heatherwick. I mention this because when I was invited into the project, Britain had a really great idea, which is to have LED screens everywhere. And I asked if anybody had been to Shanghai, and if they noticed Shanghai was full of LED screens. So why would you go thousands of miles to show the Chinese what they had? So instead of that, we built a very low-tech dandelion. Some of the slides really have gone. I talked to the British Museum. This is a traditional museum, very attractive to the Chinese. In the last 6 months, the percentage of Chinese visitors has gone from 8 to 11%, just within 6 months. So 11% now of visitors to the British Museum are from China. It's big, and the shop is a resource for what one might call traditional British goods. But, and I think this is the important point, technology is changing the way in which Chinese people relate to museums. So, for instance, people have mentioned Alipay. Nobody seems to know about Alifish, which many of you may know. Alifish is an online licensing platform by Alibaba, and British Museum, the V&A, many museums across Europe are now using Alifish to license their products in China. This is extremely important because it means before anybody comes to Britain, they can, as it were, buy a product from places like the V&A and the BM. So this is a joke, but a serious joke. I checked with 50 of my friends in Beijing, slightly younger than me, in their 20s. And they don't need to buy another Louis Vuitton handbag, but what they did want was a mobile cover from the V&A. That was a really cool thing to have. So in those circumstances, technology is changing the relationship of museums. The BM will set up a series of licensed shops with Alifish across China. The V&A will open in Shenzhen in December, which means the V&A and the Pompidou will open in Shanghai. The Centre Pompidou will open in Shanghai in 2 years' time. This means that European museums, European culture, is already in China. This will change the way Chinese tourists think of us. This is an image from New York, an image of an enormous exhibition at the Guggenheim Museum, which is just opened, of Chinese art from 1990 to 2008. Because my designer isn't very great, what you can't see with these two dogs is everyone surrounding them is Chinese. But you can see the person in the middle of the slide on the right who is Chinese. I was at the Guggenheim at this opening, and it was full of influential Chinese people. Absolutely full. Forgive me for saying this because I'm a European, despite Brexit, when I will suddenly leave Europe, is that Europe is not very good at showcasing Chinese culture, and particularly contemporary Chinese culture. And that seems to me increasingly an important part of any offer that Europe has to make to China. You can't welcome Chinese visitors without showing the respect to their culture, which means actually you should show Chinese exhibitions. And I don't mean of the Xi'an warriors, wonderful terracotta warriors, wonderful that they are, but what Chinese people are consuming and experiencing at the present. So for me, this is a very important thing, which is Chinese people want a mirror of themselves when they go abroad, as well as new experiences. And I think Europe really needs to think very, very carefully about showing the respect to the Chinese culture from which its Chinese visitors come. The BM, the British Museum's Joseph Houghton Gallery, is a good example. It's a gallery in the British Museum of Chinese culture and Chinese art. It's immensely popular with Chinese tourists. So while Chinese tourists, of course, want to see things that are new and different, they also want to be able to see themselves in the world. I haven't mentioned, and thank heavens nobody else mentioned, KOLs. Key opinion leaders. Now, these are extraordinarily important figures in China, and there are, in China now, cultural and arts KOLs. Here are just two of them. On the left is Masha Ma, an old friend of mine, or rather a young friend of mine, because almost everybody is young. Masha Ma is a fashion designer whose shows are now in the Paris Fashion Week, who moves between Shanghai, London, and Paris. She's very influential. On the right is Adrian Chung, who runs a series of museums and shopping malls across China which foreground art and culture. You need to be able to talk to these kinds of people and to be able to persuade them that your destination is the right destination. There is in the art world a guy who called Grandpa Gu, who's got millions of followers. And if Bath or if Marseille or if wherever is mentioned on his site, there will be a spike in visits. These people are extremely, extremely influential, and they are specific to the arts and cultural world. I think it was Gordon again who mentioned the word individual, about individual travellers. And my view about this is the word is independent. The Chinese visitors of the future, the younger visitors, those between 20 and 35, want to be independent. And although, of course, we can package experiences for them, and experiences is important, these are also people who want to find their own experiences. And across Europe, most of the great cities, Berlin has the Mitte district, Turin is the Quadrilatero, London has Shoreditch. These are places where young culture, fashion, design, clubbing are all available along with restaurants and bars. And these are an extraordinarily important destination for the Chinese. But nobody is thinking of attracting them. So if you give an example, I was in Bath 2 days ago, and I went to the Roman baths, and of course the audio was in Chinese. I went to the Modern Museum in Bath and asked for a Chinese audio file. Nothing. I went to the London's Design Museum and asked for an audio file. Nothing. There is a way in which contemporary culture, which is extremely attractive to Britain, that European contemporary culture is not yet thinking about how to attract and sustain and develop and give pleasure to Chinese visitors. Nobody's also mentioned, again, I'm so grateful, otherwise I would have felt embarrassed. Nobody has mentioned the Chinese students who study in Europe. There are something like 100,000 Chinese students studying in Britain, which is almost half the number of Chinese outbound visitors who visit Britain. In Europe, mainland Europe, Western Europe, there are about 70,000 Chinese students. These are extraordinarily important because they will leave and then they will return. And when they return, and you have to remember, Britain in the last 10 years has hosted 1 million Chinese students. 1 million Chinese students. When they return, they will have to be provided for very differently. They speak English, they've lived here, they know the things that they know, but they are the next generation of influencers. And these are people who largely came to Europe because they wanted to study creativity, design, fashion, art, architecture, and so on. So these are an extraordinarily important constituency for the contemporary culture that at its best Europe can offer to go with its heritage. And it strikes me that all the cities in Europe need to pay attention to joined-up culture, not only heritage, but contemporary, not only groups, but independent, not only people coming from China, but people who've lived here, gone back to China, and are now coming as tourists again. Europe needs to wake up. Thank you.